story about going bankrupt has been there from 2020 onwards. You ask the same people, international as well as national, what they were saying in 2020. The problem is that most of these people who make these statements, they are not held accountable. Nobody bothers about them after they make these headlines. After it doesn't happen, nobody is there to question them.
Central Bank Governor Nivard Cabraal yesterday came down hard on those calling for default, insisting that the central bank has been on a difficult yet sure path of boosting reserves for debt repayment, including an ongoing exercise of restructuring and rescheduling to ensure currency stability whilst meeting essential imports of the country. Default, as some business leaders and internet economists want, will be disastrous and lead to anarchy, Cabraal told journalists, adding that their motive is questionable when the government has already made arrangements to settle the $500 million international sovereign bonds maturing on the 18th of January. Noting that Sri Lanka had been successful in servicing maturing ISBs to the tune of $2 billion in the past 2 years, Cabraal insisted there would be no default whatsoever. He said that amidst the pandemic and other external shocks, debt servicing would remain a challenge, but that the government was committed to honoring all its obligations as it had done for 73 years. The CBSL chief also ruled out that the forex and reserves crisis had led to a shortage of essential imports, but cited other supply chain and non-forex issues.
That is one of the serious problems that we are having. In 2020, they said that this country will fail. They said we won't be able to make the payment. We had only $7.5 billion reserves. We had to pay $6.5 billion, and therefore we will not be able to settle it. In 2021, they said the same thing. They said 2021, you wouldn't be able to settle your debts, you will fail. And then that also didn't happen. Then 2021, they went to the extent of saying that we have the reserves at very low levels, and therefore you won't be able to pay the debts. And therefore, country will crash, economy will crash. If you remember that, you take your mind back to all these people who said those things, including some of the journalists. I'm sorry to say I have nothing against them, but they were reporting what others were saying. They said that in 2021, we will not have reserves, and the reserves have now come to the level of being bankrupt, and that we won't be able to make ends meet. We very openly said, we will have $3 billion and we will make the payments in 2022. Now, after we have countered their story that we won't be able to pay, that we will crash, and then the whole country will go into chaos and ultimate terrible situations will occur. When we say that we will pay, now they're saying, don't pay.
In 2021, we started with only $5 billion in reserves but paid $6 billion debt by year-end and still finished with $3 billion. This was despite the loss of $8 billion in tourism earnings due to the pandemic. We managed and we can manage in 2022 and the future as well, Cabraal said. When we have earmarked funds to repay $500 million ISBs maturing on the 18th of January, now they are saying don't pay. Their argument is that by not paying $500 million, all our problems will be solved. This is not the case, as default will aggravate problems. As a nation that has honored all its past debt dues, we have diligently worked towards ensuring this track record going forward. We don't want to go down the path Lebanon did when, despite having reserves, it defaulted and went into a serious crisis, Cabraal said. $500 million amounts to half a month's imports. The solution is that we need to grow the reserves. Those who are calling for non-payment must go back to their original warning in 2020 and 2021 of the dangers of default. How could they deceive themselves and be absent-minded? They are fooling themselves with self-fulfilling prophecies. We are on top of the situation. We are gradually building the reserves to $3 billion from $1.5 billion, and we are gradually increasing it. Some people are not happy but dreaming Sri Lanka will default. Cabraal said foreign-held ISBs were $1.5 billion and locally held ISBs worth $1.5 billion could be rolled over. The CBSL chief urged the public and private sector to move on with confidence in the economy and the measures taken to strengthen it, warning those with agendas or sinister objectives not to dash this confidence with baseless suggestions. A chartered accountant by profession, Cabraal said, "Debt restructuring doesn't mean you go to lenders and say we are bankrupt, and we can't pay. Debt restructuring means finding different ways of handling the debt or changing the debt structure early." He said CBSL was changing some of the debt instruments. In 2015, ISBs amounted to $5 billion when GDP was $79 billion, but after 5 years, during which period there was an IMF program, Sri Lanka had $15 worth of ISBs when the economy was only $84 billion. Without a considerable increase in the GDP, there was a situation when ISBs had tripled. There lies the structural defect, recalled Cabraal. We gradually started pulling this back from ISBs to other instruments. Longevity and interest rates are controlled to some extent. We reduced ISBs to $13 billion from $15 billion. Negotiating and have negotiated with other countries to lower interest rate and longer period of times to settle ISBs. The intention is to reduce ISBs $10 billion whilst growing the economy to $100 billion. This is a clear strategy. We are actually restructuring debt. We are doing this without inflicting pain to investors who had faith in Sri Lanka.
Our targets have been for different items of areas where we are moving towards. Whether it works exactly at the end of the 6 months, we don't know. But in total, we have a lesser target as far as the overall inflows are concerned.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.